Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Islandora webinar for the month of August in the year 2016. This month, we are pleased to present a discussion on the Islandora Form Builder. Based on the Drupal Form API, the Islandora Form Builder makes it possible to create, copy, and edit XML forms to fit your metadata profile. The Form Builder discussion will be led by discoverygarden developer Dan Aitken. QA Dan is very well known in the Islandora community, having been involved with the project in many capacities for a number of years. I want to let you all know that we're going to be recording this webinar, as you've heard, and I'll send out a link to access it later on today. So my name is Adam Smith. I'm a Sales and Marketing Associate with discoverygarden. I joined the team in 2015 and have quickly become immersed in a broad range of different Islandora projects. I may have dealt with many of you online here today, but for those of you who I haven't been introduced to, had the pleasure of meeting, I look forward to doing so in the near future. So for today's webinar, we're going to start with a quick overview of Islandora and discoverygarden as always. That'll lead us into the introduction of our guest speaker, Dan Aitken, who will lead us through the discussion on the Islandora Form Builder. Following Dan's presentation, I'll open the floor to any questions. And as your mics will be muted as always, I'll ask that you type your questions in the chat window, and I'll gladly read them out loud during the Q&A session. So with that, let's get started. So as I mentioned, let's start by talking a little bit about Islandora for anyone who might be new to the community. So the Islandora open source technology stack consists of three core components: Drupal, Apache Solr, and Fedora Commons. The stack also includes a lot of utility components and dependencies as well. Islandora is a very large open source software stack, and it includes many applications. So in essence, the developers of Islandora and the community that supports it are experts at integrating third-party tools into Islandora. So let's talk a little bit more about the core components individually, and we'll start with Drupal. Many of you are familiar with Drupal, as it is a leading open source content management system with over 30,000 user-contributed modules from almost 100,000 active community members or developers. Active community members are vital to any open source project, and the same can be said for Drupal. People are invested in Drupal, and that leads to ongoing development and success. Drupal serves as the presentation layer within Islandora. It's how we create a website and how we expose it to the internet. We also use Drupal for collaboration. It has a great framework for users, roles, and permissions. And we use that for workflow activities, and it really does integrate well with a lot of other functionality within Islandora. So Islandora, in essence, is a suite of Drupal modules that allow us to build repositories on top of Fedora Commons. These modules make it possible to build, populate, and configure a digital repository without the aid of a developer. The next is Apache Solr. Apache Solr is used for discovery within Islandora. Solr is very powerful, flexible, and configurable. It's used on some of the most heavily trafficked websites and applications worldwide. Some key features include full text search, search faceting and filtering. It's highly scalable and fault tolerant, and provides near real-time indexing. For example, if we ingest an object into Islandora, it's going to be indexed within Solr almost immediately and will become searchable probably within 30 seconds after ingest. The final core component is Fedora Commons. Now, this is the layer that stores and preserves all of our digital content. Fedora Commons is purpose-built for data preservation and long-term data accessibility. Some key features of Fedora Commons include auditing and fixity checks, RDS, XML support. It's able to scale Fedora Commons to millions of objects. It has support for virtually any file type, and it's built for interoperability. You can export and migrate your data in a format so that it can be stored elsewhere should you choose. So as mentioned, these three core components make up the open source technology framework. And we like to call it a framework as it really is an integration of components working well together. Now, organizations all over the world are using the Islandora framework to build their repositories. Some of these instances are customized in order to meet specific needs, and some of these are not customized, as the software is very usable out of the box. People are scaling these repositories into the millions of objects, and they continue to have these large repositories perform very well. Islandora helps create fast, usable sites that are meeting customers' expectations. Let's take a quick look of who and what kind of organizations are using Islandora out in the wild. So the library and academic fields, universities, academic libraries, and academic departments, and individual scholars even, or researchers use Islandora for digital curation. For example, the University of Manitoba, UCLA, Cal Poly, and the University of Western Sydney. museums, and cultural institutions. It's used by such organizations as the Baseball Hall of Fame, which we are currently completing a project for, the New York Historical Society, Patrick Henry Memorial Foundation. Nonprofit and government organizations use Islandora as well for the curation of their digital assets, such as the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Smithsonian Institute, and the Aegis Trust. So these types of organizations are using Islandora because they're dealing with more and more data every year, and it's often growing at exponential rates. So as the data volume continues to grow, it becomes harder and harder to manage, access, and preserve. So the solution is developing a digital curation process that includes an Islandora digital repository. Organizations can create robust digital repository systems tailored to their specific needs and grow the system to handle virtually limitless amounts of data. So let's move on to a very quick overview of how Discovery Garden fits into the picture. Discovery Garden is a service provider of Islandora. So we work to remove barriers to using the open source technology. We launched in 2010, and we were a partner in the Islandora Foundation, which is a nonprofit entity that fosters the Islandora code. So since we've launched, we've contributed to over 90% of the Islandora code base, which we've written here at Discovery Garden on behalf of many of our customers. We offer a lot of services that relate to the Islandora repository. A complete list of our services can be found on our website, and I'll also include a link to that page in the follow-up package that I'll send out later on today. Okay, so with all that being said, on to the reason that many of you are here today. It's my pleasure to introduce Dan Aitken. As I mentioned, Dan is a developer here at Discovery Garden and has many years of experience related to all things Islandora. Dan has led Islandora-themed presentations to groups all over the world, and I'm sure that today's presentation on the Islandora Form Builder will be extremely informative and beneficial to all those that are online here today. So without further ado, I'd like to pass things over to Dan.
Yeah, that's Adam.
Dan.
I certainly hope so. Okay, so we're going to talk about some things about the Form Builder. Just going to go through the basics here. What is the Form Builder? We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some of the basic metadata forms. We're going to talk about modifying them and creating new ones. And I'm going to go through some of the basics. We're going to do a little bit of hands-on. We're going to take a look at modifying an actual form in the wild, and it's going to be super exciting. So XML forms, as this slide says, is a collection of Drupal modules that allow for the manipulation of XML documents through Drupal forms. And this is a really, really important piece to understand as part of this. One thing that catches people on Form Builder quite a bit is that XML forms and XML Form Builder is not necessarily just a way of creating forms that represent XML. It's a way of creating Drupal forms that can create and modify XML documents. And so it's very important to understand that there are two separate parts of this. There's the sort of top layer, which is the part of it that allows you to create a Drupal form and create parts inside that Drupal form. And then there's a lower layer under that that we'll talk about that allows you to take each of those parts of that Drupal form and connect them to XML controls. XML Form Builder is the part of XML forms that actually lets you do that. It allows you to create form definitions, and it contains a very robust tool for allowing you to do that. So as I said, it's built upon the existing Drupal Form API. That is the top layer of this. It's what you look at when you look at the actual form. And then underneath that, there is a series of XML standards, custom schemas. As it says, it is highly configurable, even perhaps ridiculously configurable. The tool, XML Form Builder itself, is pretty daunting to look at, but we'll take a look at it when we get in. And as it says, the bottom forms are portable. There is an export option, there is an import option, and if you're feeling really, really brave, you can even mess around with exported and imported XML forms. You can add additional properties to it. Basically, anything that's supported by the Drupal Form API you can do with XML Form Builder form fields. There's a couple of exceptions and gotchas, and we might go over them by the end. So as it says here, form definitions are about XPath, and we'll get into exactly how it deals with it in XPath in a bit. But for those who don't know what XPath is a method of querying an XML document. It's a sort of a query language that's built specifically to be able to look for things inside an XML document. We have some examples here. If I click on this link, it's going to open a browser, and that's fine. Well, let's do it. Oh my goodness! Now we're in a browser. So here's some examples of things you can do with XPath. Querying a node. What you're essentially doing is you're starting from a point, and you're making a query down the tree of XML from that point. Or you can go just anywhere inside the document using 2 slashes. You can start from the current point with a single slash. Dot is the point. Yes, page is super helpful. Thank you, Microsoft. And then there are other more complicated things we can do in here, like putting in asterisks for wildcards. We can query for specific attributes. Like here, there's an example. Specialty equals style. Or the specialty attribute is the same as the style attribute. But you can also query for specific things with attributes. You can query for all kinds of things. It's actually really, really robust. You can also establish namespaces. This one establishes a namespace of my, and we will get into a little bit of that when we're talking about forms. Let's switch back to, I go to presenter view. No, that's not going to do it. Let me get back to, there we go. Okay. There's a cheat sheet there as well. I would, if you don't know much about XPath, I would go and look into it because it's absolutely essential in being able to work with the XML Form Builder. As well, Oxygen is mentioned as a tool that's useful here. I recommend taking a look at Oxygen if you haven't before. It is our go-to tool for messing around with XML. It is incredibly useful. So the basic operation of the Form Builder form is what we call CRUD. And CRUD is not unique to XML Form Builder. CRUD is just sort of a general concept for not only messing around with XML, but messing around with any mutable thing. It consists of 4 basic actions that you can take. The first being to create something, the second being to read something, the third being to update something, and the fourth being to delete something. And between those 4 actions, creating, reading, updating, and deleting, you can do anything with XML, or realistically anything that you can mess around with. The form, as it says, treats each field in the form as a potential action. The reason it says potential is because it's not necessarily, because forms are simply Drupal forms, you don't necessarily have to take any XML-based action with any of the pieces. It's just that every piece of the form could potentially make changes to XML, or read from XML, or update some existing XML, or anything like that. And it does that creating, reading, updating, deleting. It determines where it's going to do that based on XPath. You tell it exactly where to go and what to do inside the XML document when pieces of the form are messed around with. So let's talk about these CRUD options. The first one we'll talk about is creating elements. So how do you place an element inside a piece of XML? Well, you create it. A create action is taken when an element doesn't currently exist. It can't be found. The XML form, or XML Form Builder will determine that an element needs to be created there. It remembers what was read so that it can do that later. If nothing can be read, then it will be created. We'll talk about reading in a section, or in a second rather. But that's the basic process here. Is it looks inside the XML form, determines if something can be read, and if something can't be read, it is created. That's what it says there. If read was failed and the parent XML exists, we'll get into specifically what that's all about when we're messing around with the form. After the form is submitted, we create an element. We create anything that goes inside it. Whether it's an element or an attribute, we append it to whatever the defined parent is. I think the next slide is, we're going to start, oh no, we're still in create actions. But I want to actually go over to XML Form Builder and start showing you some of this stuff. This just tells us that there's a few different things that we can potentially create inside an XML document. We can create an attribute, we can create an element, or we can just shove some actual XML in there. You'll notice as well that it says that percent value percent is a sort of replacement value for whatever the value of the actual element is. That allows us to place in just a whole bunch of XML and say, okay, we still want to use whatever people type in for this particular field. So take out percent value percent and replace it with whatever they actually typed into the field. I think that's all of the create. Yeah, that's so I want to switch out of here. I'm going to quickly go back to, I'm still in Chrome, but I'm going to exit full screen. Here we go. Go over to our, this is sandbox.discoverygarden.ca. This is a site that we keep up that you can mess around with. You can go in, you can take a look at things if you want to. It's a fully fledged installation of Islandora that's, it says it gets raked on a nightly basis. I think that's our systems guy using some of his fancy systems terminology. That just means it's going to be reset every night. So you can mess around with it. You can try interesting things on here. And don't worry, because it's all going to get reset every night. If I go over to the Islandora section in the configuration menu, this is where all the Islandora options are, and one of them is Form Builder. This is given to you if the Form Builder module is installed. These are all the default forms that come with the solution packs in Islandora. You'll notice that we can't edit any of these default forms. However, we do have the option to create a new form from scratch or import a form, and you'll also see that we have the option to export existing forms and copy existing forms, which has been done. There's a brand new My Image form down here, which has been copied, I believe, from the basic image mods form. So you can't mess around with any of the default ones that are system defined, but you can make copies of them yourself and mess around with them. So this one we can actually go in and edit. So if I click on edit, it's going to bring us to the XML form builder. It's also going to tell me that there are security updates. That's fine. This is the XML form builder. It's a very, you can see it basically looks like a file tree with some things that we can mess around with. Here's a little preview inside here. That's what comes up by default. But if I click on any of these elements over on the left-hand side, it's going to show me the properties of that particular element. So let's just choose one here, a simple one like genre. Here are the properties of the genre elements. Something important to note here is you'll see that these elements are organized in a tree structure over here. That tree structure does not represent the structure of the XML. This is what we were getting at before, that there is a top layer of Drupal form elements here, and then there are create, read, update, and delete contexts underneath that mess around with the XML. This is not an XML structure. It's highly recommended that you try to make it similar to an XML structure, but realistically, this is the structure of the Drupal form. And as we put things inside this structure, we're going to be able to sort of abstract some actions with XML inside of this. At the very, very top, we have the form properties here, and this is where we create the root element, where we give it a namespace or several namespace URIs. This is a mods form, so we've given it a root element name of mods. We've also given it a namespace, like a base namespace URI here of the mods version 3 namespace. You'll also see down here that we have added the mods prefix, which uses that same namespace. This will become important in a minute when we go to start making XPaths. Our root element here is, jumping around a little, our root element here is the form itself. And that has to be the root element. Our root element has to be an actual Drupal form, and everything else goes underneath that. Our root element also defines where in the XML we read from. We're going to get into the read context in a little bit, but let's go back to the genre just so I can show you how the create works. So there's a whole bunch of controls in here. You'll see there's a tab called Common Form Controls, and then there's another tab called Advanced Form Controls, and there's one called More Advanced Controls. I'll tell you why those are separate in a minute, but it looks a little bit goofy like that. At the very, very top here, we choose the type of field. And you'll notice as we mouse over it, it says hash type. If you go and take a look at the Drupal Form API, you can see what all of these different elements do, but we also have little descriptions here just to be helpful, what they're used by, things like that. So currently this genre field exists as a text field. And if I save and preview this form and scroll down to genre, you can see there's a text field. It's got the same title that we had over here. It's got the description that we put in here. See, we have the title of genre. We have a description that showed up there. I can mess around with this field. I can make this text area instead of a text field. And that's just a different type of Drupal element. If I save and preview this here, you'll see that the genre is now one of these big text areas that I can drag and make bigger and can contain more text that it's actually able to show to me. There's a whole bunch of different fields in here, but we're just going to deal with a few of them, the most popular ones that we're able to work with. Well, you can also place a default value in here, and you can specify it as being required so that people have to fill it out when they fill out the form. So if we put a default value in here of default, and I go and take a look at this form, when the form is loaded, that value of default will be populated here in the genre field. But moving on to the actual reason I wanted to take a look at this, this is the create action, and it contains all these different things we looked at in the slide. The way that an action works is we start from a context. If you remember, I mentioned that XPath has to start from somewhere in order to start the query. So we actually have to define where we're starting from. And the places that we can, so we define a context for that place that we start from. We have two different contexts available to us. One of them is the parent element, and the other is the document root. So whenever we're doing an XPath query to a place, we have to make sure that we're starting from the right spot. In this case, with genre, I think that the parent element and the document root are both the same location. They're both the root of the form. But just to be safe, like, it's better practice to always try to use the parent element if at all possible, and only go to the documents context if you absolutely have to, like if you have to make some really weird XPath. From the parent element, we search for an element at self. You'll see self : node in parentheses, or node followed by a pair of parentheses. That refers to the element that we're currently at. So what this all means put together is we go to the context of the parent, which is the root form, and then from there we search for an element, but the element that we're searching for is the element itself. That's what that, I find genre here again. Man, I'm bad at looking for this stuff. We search for self node, which is the parent element itself. So we're going up to the context of the parent, we're searching for itself, and then after that, we're saying, I want to create a new element. And that element is going to be an actual chunk of XML, and it's going to look like this. It's going to say genre. It's going to have an attribute called authority. That authority attribute is going to be populated with the value LCTGM. And then whatever people type in this text field, when I go to create that element, what people have typed into that text field is going to go right here into that value. The percent value percent is going to be replaced with whatever the text field contains. So all together one more time, because this is sort of weird and esoteric. What we're doing is we're going from this particular Drupal field. We're saying, hey, take a look at what the parent is, and then from the parent, search for self node. So the parent up here we've already found is the document root, the mods, or the first one that we find. It's also the one that we've defined up here in the form properties, the root element name, mods. So we're saying go to the parent of genre, which is mods. Start searching, or search for that mods element itself, and then underneath that mods element, create a genre element, and it's going to look like this. This is one of the XML type elements, but we can take a look at another one, like type of resource is just an element itself. This might be a little easier to read. It's the same thing. We're going to the parent, which is mods. We're searching for the parent itself, which is still mods. And then underneath that mods element, we are creating a type of resource element. We don't have to define any XML because we're saying outright, we are creating an element. It's a good question. We'll get to that at the end of here. You'll also notice that this is a different type of field. You'll notice that when we go to save and preview this form, this here, the type of resource, is a drop-down menu, or we call it a select field that contains a whole bunch of different options. Excuse me. This is where we get into the advanced form controls and the more advanced controls. The advanced controls and the more advanced controls allow us to use all the other Drupal Form API elements. Stuff like an autocomplete path, or the number of columns that should be displayed in a text area, a prefix and a suffix that can be useful for theming and things, or even a theme that can be useful for theming. All sorts of different things, sizes for fields that support it, like field sets. We have options to make parts of it collapsible and collapsed. We'll get to all of that in a bit. Here in the more advanced controls, we have all the Form API elements that can contain multiple values. And one of the fields that can contain multiple values is the list of options here. This is where we populate our list of options that we're going to have in the select field. So if I add one in here, I call it new option, and this is what's going to actually go into the XML, this value of new option. Over here, I can give it a label, which might look nicer. You might be able to capitalize it. This is just something that's going to display to the user. That's the display portion of it, and then the value here is what's actually going to get written to the XML when somebody selects that. So if I go to save and preview this form again, we can see that new option has been added to the type of resource select, and I can choose that if I want, and if somebody does, then that will be populated as the type of resource, or the value of the mod's type of resource element. Going back to, so we've talked about the create option. I've gone through the create option here. where we can create XML or an element. I haven't gone over attribute yet, but it works pretty much exactly the same way. I don't know if I have an element attribute in the basic image form. Role is not one. But regardless, it functions exactly the same way. I might make one just to demonstrate how it works, but I'll do that after I've gone through all the contexts here. Now that we've talked about creating, the next one I want to go over is update. We're going to go over them out of order a little bit because it's sort of create and update work together. Updating an element happens if it already exists, but the value has been changed, like somebody messed around with the value. It happens when somebody goes to edit a form, and it also happens in some very rare cases. Like you'll see it says, if read was successful and the element attribute exists, then after the form is submitted, update the value. So we take an existing value that we found in the XML and somebody made a change to it, and we're going to go ahead and update that in our XML. It looks like this. Again, the path context and the path are important here. If we've already managed to find a value in the XML, then we have this self context. This is what happens after we look inside the XML. We find some kind of a value like genre, and we have that available to us to search from. Again, this self : node allows us to select that actual element. In most cases, when you're going to update an element, you're just going to update the element itself. So you'll see like 99% of these update elements look exactly the same. It's just going to the context of the element itself, searching for the element itself, and then updating whatever's in it. Self-node, 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 self-node. It's all just self-node update context. There are very rare cases in which you might want to mess around with something on the parent or something in some other part of the document. And so this just gives you the option to go there if you want. But usually you're just going to be updating the element that you found itself. Deletion, we're going to go over third. Deletion happens when we have a repeatable element that has been removed. And there are two different kinds of repeatable elements. There are tags and there are tab panels. And I think we have both of them in here. I'll actually show you what they look like on the form. We're going to save and preview this. This is a tab panel. A tab panel is pretty much what it sounds like, actually. It's a panel that allows you to place multiple tabs inside it. And each of those tabs essentially functions as a miniature form. So right now, this tab panel has one tab inside it that doesn't have any information in it. But if I click the Add button down here, I get a second tab that can also be used to populate information. These tabs, when I go in to look at the XML, are going to be placed at exactly the same point, and they're going to use exactly the XML or the same element name. So it's for stuff in your XML that is allowed to be repeatable. Like if you've got a section, like for example, in mods, name is a repeatable element. You can of course have multiple people that need to be, or multiple organizations that need to be defined by your XML. So you have a repeatable tabs section that contains individual tab panels. Just go back here quickly, save and preview. Talk about specifically how those work in a second, and then we'll talk about the delete action. So that's what a tab panel looks like. These down here, these elements that contain the green plus beside them, these are tags. And individual elements inside a tags field are a tag. It's kind of confusing to have one called tags and one called tag. You could have multiple ones with tags. I'll show you how it works very quickly. we can have one topic. I'll call it first topic X. And if I click on the plus element here, or the plus button here, it allows me to add a second one in, second topic. As well, if I click on this green first topic down here, it switches them out so that I can edit this one. I can also remove tags that have been placed already. If I click on the red minus. So what I wanted to demonstrate here is the delete context. You'll see it's checked off and it says delete self at the path of self node. You'll also notice that update is not checked off here because we don't actually update these kinds of fields. We simply populate what's inside them, and if somebody's removed one, then we just remove it outright. It's because tab panels and tags, or tab panels don't actually have value. They're just a placeholder for some XML that's going to go inside there. You'll see that we have a parent element, or a parent node up here in the Drupal form called tabs. This is what contains our tab panel. You'll also see that it has absolutely no create, read, update, or delete controls. That's because we don't want to populate the parent of it. We just want to populate each individual set of tab panel fields. But it does have a title on it up top so that we have something nice looking. Inside here, in each individual tab panel, that's where we place all of our XML controls. You'll notice also we don't have like a title and a description over here. That's because those parts aren't going to get populated. But we do have pretty much exactly the same things we see in other places in the XML document. We look at the parent, we go to the self, we search for an element, and we give it a name of name. And when we go to delete it, we want to delete itself, so that's what this section is populated with. The last, did we pass over read? I think I managed to possibly double click something and pass over read. Nah, it's just possibly missing in here.
Missing, yeah.
Oh well, I'll go over it anyway. It was supposed to come after create. That actually makes a lot of sense now. The read context is where we go when we go to edit an XML form, where we go to find any particular XML that's going to populate a Drupal form field. So for example, if we go back to our genre, you can see we need a context and we need a path, just like we need for create, update, and delete. This is where it's going to read from, and this is why our namespacing becomes important here, because our forms have a namespace of some kind, and when we go to do XPath inside that form, we need to be aware that the namespace is there. We need to register it, and we need to search for things using that prefix. So you'll see from genre, we go up to the parent, which is the root element here, and instead of searching for the self, we search for any field that's called mods genre. As well, if we look, there might be some deeper level ones here. Let me see if I can find. Okay, so for example, language. When we create language, we have mods language with a mods language term element inside it. So because we have an element and a sub-element that we've created, when we go to read it, we need to put that full path in here. We go to the parent and we search for mods language, and then underneath that, we search for mods language term. And that gives us the same element that we created up here. We can also be more specific here. You'll see with language term, we've given it an authority and a code. So we could decide to be more specific here if we have multiple language terms, if that's something that's available to us. We can specify an attribute by saying authority equals ISO 639-2E. And we can also say type equals code. This allows us to specify that the language term that we want is the ISO 639-2B authority and the code type. That way we don't accidentally find other elements that might be mods language / mods language term. This becomes especially important in other places like our mod's name. We might have a specific kind of roles that have specific authorities, like this one has the authority of mark relator, but we might have different fields for different role terms from different authorities. So we may want to drill down that far. I could potentially add a second text field in here. If I went up here and added a new text field in here, I could do other role. And when I go to create this one, I'm creating it with the authority of mark relator. So when I go to create this one, I want to create it from the parent. We're going to do sort of the same thing, self-node. Oops. We're going to create an element. We're going to create XML. I'm going to copy and paste it from here, but I'm going to remove that authority part. We're just going to do type as text. Holy spacebar. Let's do a little bit faster. Remove that authority. So now we have a role term without an authority, and we have a role term with an authority. So in order to specify the difference between these two, I need to make sure that I'm searching for this authority in this one. Authority equals mark relator. So now that'll specifically find anything that's been placed in these kinds of fields. With this one, when I read, I'm going to read from the parent, and we're going to read mods role / mods role term. And because I don't have an authority here, I can search for not authority. And this specifies that I'm specifically searching for fields that do not have an authority. I also say when I go to update this, I'm going to update itself. And now we have another role field here. So when I go to save and preview this, we have two role fields here. This one will be a mark relator field, and this one will be a field that represents a role that has no authority. I think that's just about all the different types of fields that I wanted to go over. Although you will notice a couple of other ones that are in here, field sets and markup fields. Field sets and markup fields are good for organizing your form and organizing your XML. Field sets look like this physical description field set that's been placed inside a nice little bounding box here. Field sets are nice to organize things, and the other thing that's nice about a field set is if you go into if you go into advanced form controls, you'll see you have the ability to make it collapsible and make it collapsed, so that for fields that might not be that useful for most people, you can just specify that from the start, it's just collapsed like here, and most people aren't going to see it. But if they need to fill it out, they can expand it and fill in all the different fields here. Markup, you'll also notice that this field set does have XML content in it, even though you can't really fill anything out. And that's simply because even though you can't fill out a value for subject in mods, subject does have child elements, and so to structure everything nice and cleanly, we've placed the subject element here in an uncreatable field. Markup functions exactly the same way, except that it's invisible. So you'll see we have a title info field here that's completely invisible, and it just contains title and subtitle. We could potentially turn this into a field set and save that. And now we do have a field set here as a nice bounding box. I forgot to put a title in it, but field set and markup work exactly the same way. They're just very nice for structuring your XML and making sure that it follows a nice hierarchy of fields. The last things that were on here were just some, a few interesting things to go and take a look at. We have all kinds of example forms up on Islandora Labs. The community sort of shepherds that and keeps them nice and organized. This is the path. If you want to go and edit forms, you'll see it's up here, admin Islandora XML forms. That's where you can go and mess around with those on a site. This is a best practices thing, which catches me up all the time, catches a lot of people up. Save and preview after you make each edit, because if things go wrong and your form blows up, you want to know exactly what it is that you did in order to make it blow up. And saving and previewing after making each edit is a really easy way of making sure you know what went wrong if something did go wrong. And the last part that it says here is once you have a completed form, associate it to a content model, and then you're able to use that form when you go to ingest. So if I go back to the form builder, you'll see there's an associate button over on the right-hand side here. My fancy form that I've been working on currently has no association, so I can't use it when I go to ingest some content. Well, I want to be able to use this with images. So let's associate it with the basic image content model. I'm going to create a data stream called mods, because this is a mods XML form, but you can make the data stream ID whatever you want for whatever type of XML that you're making. We can specify the title field to make it map to the label of whatever object you're creating. We can specify a transform to turn it into Dublin Core. And we can specify a self-transform to mess around with the XML after it's been ingested. So we have like a cleanup form here. There's some of them that come with Scholar, one that comes with entities apparently. There's just a simple cleanup form to get rid of empty elements. You can use that if you want to, or you can choose not to. And there's a template document that you can upload just so that you can pre-populate fields. So if we add that association, now when we go to make a basic image object, this form is available to us as an option for populating, as an option for choosing which form we want to use. We can add multiple associations here so that it can be used with basic images and large images, since it's an image form supposedly, or we can just leave it at that. And there's a functionality over here to delete associations. So now if we went to the basic image collection, we would see that would be one of our, if I go to browse repository here, and I go to, as soon as this loads, my basic image collection. If I go to manage this collection and add something to it, the first option that I'm given is to choose between the stock form that came with this content model or my fancy new image form. All right, mark XML file is turned on, so I'm going to skip by that. But here's the form that we made. I can add a title, which I'm going to just jam some letters in there. Here's our type of resource with our fancy new option that we could potentially put in. Here's our genre with the default placed in there. And here's our subject field that collapses. It's going to ask me to upload an image. I'm not going to go to that point, but now we filled out some XML. And actually, I can show you an example of this. So I go to Form Builder. I'll just quickly do this. This will be the last thing that I go over here before we answer some questions. Make a test title. We can maybe fill in our new option. We can put our genre in there. And if I submit this, we get some fancy XML that has created elements at the places we have asked it to create. that's populated with, so for example, our type of resource is that new option that we placed in. Our genre is the default that that field was populated with. So we get XML at the other end. I think that was all the things that I wanted to go over, but we'll go over some questions now. There were some that were in the chat.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Dan, for that presentation. Obviously, it was extremely informative, and I hope that everybody online learned a lot, because I know I sure did. With that, I'd open the floor to any questions. I think we have some in the chat window from during the presentation, so I'll just read them out from the start. Viewer number 6 asks, so when we batch load, oops, a little bigger.
Batch load XML instead of mods XML.
Trying to make the window a little bit bigger.
Oh,
when we batch load XML, not mods XML, I'm a bit confused about the difference.
Well, the current batch load, or the current batch loader supports just a few different types of XML. And it supports a few different types of XML because it needs to know what the ID of the data stream that is going to place it in is. This particular form that we've been creating is a mods XML form. Let me go back. Let me move this over here, actually. If I go into Form Builder, you can see this particular form that we've been filling out is a mods form. You can see there's also some other types of forms in here. There is an EAC CPF form, or there's a bunch of EAC CPF forms, actually, that these are all entity forms for organizations, persons, places. You can see there's MADS forms for things like scholars. Do we have any other MADS forms? Yeah, we do. Scholars and departments both have a MADS form, which is mods for organizations, basically. And you'll also notice if we go over here to these Islandora ingest forms, these are all forms that you can insert into the, this one there. These are all forms that we can place into the import form option here. It'll ask us to give a name for the form and upload a file. These are all files that we can use to import different types of XML. We've got Darwin Core. There's a folder called examples. Who knows what's in there? PB Core is popular and functions pretty well with Islandora. You'll see there's an XML form definition, and also there's an XLT to allow you to transform it into DC. The definition looks like, this might be really, really big, but definition looks like that. It's just XML. So if you were to save this file and import it into here, you get yourself a PB Core form. You can also create your own from scratch. Like you'll notice we, when we went into the form builder, we made the root element, our root element was mods, but potentially we could do like PB Core. I'd have to change the namespace URI. I don't know what it is off the top of my head. I'd have to add a PB Core prefix, and in our root, I'd have to change the read context to make sure that we find our PB Core element. But other than that, it's all, you can make pretty much any kind of XML you want. It's just that when you go to batch load, the batch loader only recognizes a few different types of XML. Like, I believe it understands PB Core, I believe it understands mods, DC, and Darwin Core, and possibly a couple of other kinds. I don't know off the top of my head, but those are all possible.
All right, so next question was asking if adding value URI attribute to genre possible. That's possible.
It certainly is. We have our genre text field here. There are two ways to do this, basically. One is our genre authority, and we could make a static value URI, like value URI equals value. That's not super useful, of course, because your value URI is supposed to be something that you can specify, but that's a way to put it in statically like that. The other way that we could potentially do this is, let me just erase that there. The other way that we could do this is to create a new element, we'll call it genre value URI, as a text field, genre value URI, that creates an element. We'll create it at the parent, and we'll go to, our path is mods genre value URI. So that's the path to the value URI attribute of the mods genre element. And what we're creating is, or actually we're not, that's what we're going to do when we read it, sorry. But when we create it, we're going to the mods genre. We're creating an attribute, and that attribute is called value URI. Then when we go to read the document, we are going to read from the parent context, and this is where we're going to read from mods genre / at value URI. Allows us to read an attribute instead of reading an actual element. As well, when we go to update it, we update self node. So by doing this, we can go to the parent, we can go to the root of the document, search for that mods genre element, and create a value URI attribute on there. And then when we go to read, we're reading from that same value URI. So that allows us to read and update and create a value URI, but really any attribute on any element. We just go up one level and search for a particular field that we want to fill out with an attribute, and then create one on there, and then make sure that we're reading from the right place when we go to edit that value URI.
All right, next question. Can you add formatting in the text area of the form? For example, I'd like to have paragraph breaks in my abstract.
Paragraph breaks function, yep. I can't remember if there's any gotchas with that. I believe it's as simple as, well, one gotcha is that if you're using a cleanup XSLT or like a self-formatting XSLT, be aware that your self-formatting XSLT might remove white space. But other than that, simply adding two carriage return, like two enters or two returns into a text area field should preserve that in the XML.
All right, final question as our time grows short. How do you verify that the XML output validates against the schema?
Currently, XML Form API or XML Form Builder doesn't validate against the given schema, simply because validating against a given schema is really, really, really intensive, and also it's really intensive from a sort of programmer or computer standpoint, but also we don't really have a way of guaranteeing, like honestly, the Library of Congress's site goes down all the time, and it drives us insane because we have all these we have all these XML forms that rely on mods, and they rely on the mods schema, and they rely on the mods namespace, and forms can blow up if they rely too heavily on stuff that's outside of our control. So currently we don't validate against schema because schemas tend to be external, and they we can't guarantee that they'll actually be up, but also doing that validation is pretty intensive on the server side from that point of view. Currently, your best bet for validating against a schema, like whenever we need to do that, honestly, we use Oxygen. Like we just download the schema, download the XML, and run it through Oxygen, and that usually tells us everything that we need to know. But yeah, within XML Form Builder currently, there's no native way to do that.
All right, so that's all the time we have questions for today. Thank you again to everybody that joined and signed on today. It was very informative, as I said. We look forward to our September webinar, which we'll release details on within the coming weeks. On behalf of Dan, myself, Aaron Tripp, and the entire team at Discovery Garden, Thank you all for attending, and we'll see you next month. Bye-bye.